Today I'm going to talk about the best air filters in the world for your car and why they are. And to explain it all correctly, you're going to have a little history lesson. In the early 1900s to the early 1930s, companies like Henry Ford, they had water bath air filters where water was the filtration unit. The air would be sucked into a giant filtration unit that had water in it. And it would also have things like metal shavings, any kind of rough material. And the air would come in, go through the water and the shaving materials, then be sucked into the engine. If it ran dry, you'd be sucking dirt into the engine. They were kind of a pain to clean, and they didn't filter all that well. They started to put those round paper air filters in cars. Now the reason they were round is because most cars had carburetors that were round on the top, and the round would fit around to filter the air. And eventually they went to rectangular inside boxes because they could get more surface area that way rather than just a thin round circle. The idea is to get the most filtration area, to get the most dust out. Now even today, some large off-road vehicles like huge construction equipment, it uses an oil bath system because there's so much dust. The oil is good at getting rid of the dust. Even a paper filter is going to fill up with dust really fast, say if you're in the desert. But most of the time we don't live in a dust storm, and the paper filters are actually the best because even if it's somewhat dusty, you can always knock the dust off or get a vacuum and suck the dust off. Once they become impregnated with a lot of dirty stuff, you got to replace them. But for overall performance, these paper filters actually are the best of both worlds. So of course you're going to ask, what are the best paper filters? Well, unfortunately it's OEM, the original equipment manufacturer, because they make them so that they filter the best, get the best gas mileage. And here's a comparison to show you what I'm talking about. This is a Toyota OEM air filter. See how many pleats there are? There's a lot of filtration area. And I'm not comparing it to an aftermarket filter that fits the Toyota, but you can see there's much less pleats. There's not as much surface area. It's not going to last as long, and it's not going to filter as well. There often is a reason that the cheaper air filters cost less. There's less material in them. It's often a cheaper material that doesn't filter as well. So really, for the best filter, you want to use OEM filters. Now, you don't have to buy them at the dealer. There's lots of other places that sell them. But you want to make sure that they're quality and they're not a cheaper filter. So what if they cost less if you got to change them all the time? Or if you don't change them, they clog up faster, you get worse gas mileage, and you're wasting money. I mean, really, look at the difference. Here's the original equipment. Here's the aftermarket one. You can see this is going to filter a lot more than this chintzy little thing that hardly has any paper at all in it compared to the factory one. And I know people are going to ask, what about these aftermarket ones like K&N? Look what it says. Designed to increase horsepower and acceleration. Washable, reusable, lifetime product. Now these K&N filters are good filters. They have cloth-based filtering and there's oil in them, so they filter really well. But since they're oil impregnated, a heavy dust will clog them up really fast. Then you got to clean them. Now there's a kit for that. Here it is, but you have to clean it, dry it, oil it, and put it in. And if you put too much oil in it, it can actually ruin your MAF sensor. The MAF sensor, many cars have what's called a hot MAF sensor. And so this wire gets real hot to burn impurities. And if that oil gets on it, it will burn the MAF sensor out. So it's something you really got to be careful about in those cars. So really, contrary to lots of claims, nothing beats an OEM filter for a lot of filtration area, long life, and quality filtration. Really, there's nothing to beat it on an average car. Now fuel filters, of course, filter contaminants out of your fuel so they don't mess up with your fuel system. And to understand how they work, here's a little history lesson. When I was a young mechanic in the 60s, all cars had carburetors to make fuel go into the car. And most of them had a tiny little brass filter like this that would filter out water and some impurities. You can see it's just a tiny little metal thing that went in the front of the carburetor. Now the first car I ever had was an Opel. Yeah, a German car. Shock you, doesn't it? It had such a small gas tank. It was only 10 gallon and it was metal and it was rusting out. So I put an inline filter like this to get rid of some of the crud because I didn't have any money to buy a new gas tank. But even though this is a reasonably sized filter, rust sediments are so small. Rust kept getting into the carburetor, and it got so bad that I would take the carburetor apart all the time to clean the crud that went past the filter, and I didn't even have money for a gasket, so I used a Kellogg cereal box, and I cut the gasket out, and I had a bunch of them lying around so I could clean it out, put another gasket in, and go down the road. Realized carburetor system, this is an old Volkswagen Beetle carburetor, don't have much pressure. The fuel pump would put out 1.5 pounds pressure or so. So dirt could get stuck because there isn't that much pressure pushing it through. But cars have been fuel injected for a long time. They have higher pressure. It can go anywhere from 40 psi up to the modern GDI engines that can have over 1500 psi pressure. Now older cars like this 94 Toyota Celica, they had fuel filters externally. Here it is, it's just a big canister, there's a bolt on the top and a threaded rod on the bottom, and you replace the fuel filter every 50,000 miles. Now this is a fuel injector, one that goes in that older one, and if you look inside, look at those tiny holes. Those are the little tiny holes inside where the fuel sprays into the engine. You don't want to clog them up. And many of them have a little screen, just like a tiny mosquito screen on your house window, to keep dirt from getting into the injectors. And if any of them get clogged up, your car is going to run poorly. Now, if your fuel filter gets clogged up, it can do two main things. One, it can lower the pressure that goes to the fuel injectors. So if they don't have the right amount of pressure, they can't spray the right amount of gas into the engine. And if it's clogged up enough, it can trip a code and turn your check engine light on, and when you scan it, it can say, engine running too lean. Well, it's running too lean because it's got the normal amount of air coming in, unless your air filter's clogged up, but the fuel filter's clogged, can't pump enough fuel through, the pressure's too low, and then the car will run lean. Now, eventually running lean can burn out your pistons, make your cooling system overheat and ruin the engine, and it can burn out your catalytic converter by making it run too hot. Now, testing for a clogged fuel filter used to be easy in a car. We used to just have pressure gauges, quick install connectors, and on many cars like Fords, GMs, and Chryslers, they had a little Schrader valve, just like the valve on your tire. You would just snap it on and take the pressure to see if there's any pressure problems, like either too low or too high. If the fuel pressure regulator was bad, it was easy to do. But on most modern cars, hey, there's no such valve. In order to check the pressure, you need a kit with all these adapters. It's a royal pain in the butt. Here's some of my adapters. I've got a box that's got 3 times as many. It's a real pain taking fuel pressure readings in a modern car. Plus, if the fuel filter's clogged up, sometimes there's enough room for the pressure to be high, but the volume is low. So when you're going at higher speeds, it just doesn't have enough volume and you can't go fast. And doing a volume pressure test is another real hassle to do. So basically, you want to make sure your filter's clean. You can look around all you want under the hood, but you're not going to find a fuel filter, because guess what? They've hidden it away. And where have they hidden it? They've hidden it inside the gas tank. Engineers in their questionable wisdom have decided it's more efficient to have the filter right next to the pump inside the gas tank. Well, guess what? Changing it out has become a gigantic pain in the rear end. Now, in the case of this Matrix, it's not that big of a deal. It takes less than half an hour to change the filter. You just take out the back seat. There's a little 4-screw cap that covers over where the gas tank is, and when you take that cover off, you get inside the gas tank and you can replace the filter assembly. Now, Toyota calls it a fuel filter fuel pump assembly, and they want $697. But aftermarket, you can buy just the filter itself and replace it. Most people don't see it, they don't think about it, they leave it alone. But a clogged fuel filter will cause the pump, this is the tiny little pump that they use in Toyotas, to work too hard, then burn out. Then you'll have to replace the $697 pump and filter assembly. So really, you don't want your filter to get clogged up. Now, I have to admit, I live in Houston, Texas, a giant city, and all the gas tanks at the gas stations have been dug up, and they put in the fiberglass ones that don't rust, so you don't get crud in the gasoline from the tanks rusting and then water intruding in the gasoline. So if you have a good supply of fuel, you really don't have to worry about it getting clogged up, but who knows? Sometimes I've seen they made the gas wrong, and then when people pumped it, their car started to die. The filters would clog up. There's all kinds of things that can happen. Water can get in them. You really want to make sure you have a clean filter, especially if you live in an area where the fuel quality is questionable. And if you drive a diesel, it's even more important. Diesel, believe it or not, there's fungus that can grow inside the tank and clog everything up. So you really need a good filter on a diesel, and you need to change it a lot. And whatever you do, don't believe that nonsense that a lot of the manufacturers say that, oh, you don't have to change the fuel filter. It's a lifetime fuel filter. Well, what they mean is it's lifetime. If it clogs up and the fuel pump burns out because it's clogged up, then you get to replace that $697 assembly, and they make a lot of money selling it to you. Now, you don't need to change the filters in a modern car all that often. Maybe once every 4 or 5 years or every 60, 70,000 miles. But as you now know, it's a good idea to keep them clean. The newer oats or organic acid technology coolants, they last longer, they're less corrosive, they're less poisonous to animals if you spill some and they drink it, and it's meant to be changed about every 5 years or 100,000 miles or so. So if you're the type of person that only drives their car 100,000 miles or less and gets rid of it, heck, you don't have to change it at all then. There's HOT coolants, which stands for Hybrid Organic Acid Technology, like this pink Toyota one. These HOT coolants are the creme de la creme. They add silicates to protect the aluminum, which the oats don't have. So it actually is best for modern aluminum-based engines, and some of them you can change them every 7 years or 150,000 miles. Now, the reason these HOT coolants can last so long is that they contain less electrically conductive materials than the older coolants did, so it leads to less degradation of the rubber hoses and the metal parts because it doesn't conduct the electricity that the other coolants did. Now, this might sound a bit crazy to you, but you can actually get a voltmeter. You can measure the voltage in the coolant in your radiator system. When it gets old and dirty, and especially if it's an inorganic acid coolant, it will conduct electricity that starts to eat things up, and it can even mess with the computer sensors of your car. And that's why I've gone to this HOT coolant. Not only does it last a long time, but it doesn't conduct electricity all that well, so it doesn't mess with your electrical system, and it doesn't cause any kind of galvanic responses that are going to eat up the aluminum in your engine. But of course, everything eventually breaks down. Even a HOT coolant, they say you should change it every 7 years or 150,000 miles in a lot of these models. Check with your own make and model just to make sure when you have to change it. But you can go a long time before you have to change it in a modern car. And the important thing to remember is, when it is time to change your coolant, use the correct coolant. Now, the HOT is the best. So if you want to keep your car lasting the longest, in any car, if you flush the whole system out, you can then replace it with HOT coolant and you'll have the best protection available. But whatever you do, do not mix the inorganic acid, old green stuff, with the organic stuff, or mix the organic stuff with the hybrid organic acid technology. You want to use one type in your car. And like I said, if you flush the whole thing out, then you can use whatever one you want, but the HOTs are the best. They're going to last the longest, so do that. And I know people are going to say, but Scotty, the HOTs cost so much money. They don't cost all that much money anymore. They did originally, but now there's many aftermarket companies that make them, and you might pay an extra $3 or $4 a gallon. What's that to the life of a car? So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.